Your mind is not as free as you think it is. Right now, as you listen to these words, systems you've never noticed are quietly shaping your thoughts, your beliefs, your desires. And the most dangerous part, you believe these thoughts are yours. They're not. They've been installed, carefully, systematically, by people who understand exactly how your mind works and exactly how to make it work for them. Today, we expose the 5 most effective techniques used to rewire your mind without your knowledge. Not so you become paranoid, but so you become free. Control doesn't look like control anymore. It doesn't come with chains or commands or obvious force. Modern control is subtle, psychological. It operates through persuasion so sophisticated that you defend the thoughts that were placed in your mind as if they were your own. And the people doing this aren't always villains with malicious intent. Sometimes they're corporations trying to sell you products. Sometimes they're media platforms trying to keep you scrolling. Sometimes they're political movements trying to recruit you. Sometimes they're individuals in your life who've learned, consciously or unconsciously, how to make you think what they want you to think. The common thread? They all understand the 5 fundamental ways human minds can be rewired. And once you understand these mechanisms, you can't be manipulated by them anymore. You see the attempts. You recognize the patterns. You maintain sovereignty over your own consciousness. Let's begin. Method 1. Repetition until belief. The first and most fundamental technique, repetition. The human mind is wired to accept repeated information as true, regardless of whether it actually is. This isn't a flaw, it's a feature. It's how we learn language as children. It's how we absorb culture. It's how patterns become familiar. But this same mechanism can be weaponized against you. When you hear something once, your mind evaluates it, questions it, considers whether it's accurate. But when you hear something 10 times, 50 times, 100 times from multiple sources in different contexts, consistently reinforced, your mind stops questioning. It accepts. It assumes that something repeated so often must be true. This is why advertising works through repetition, why propaganda relies on slogans repeated endlessly, why social media algorithms show you the same narratives over and over from different accounts. They're not trying to convince you with a single powerful argument. They're trying to bypass your critical thinking through sheer repetition. Think about beliefs you hold right now. How many of them did you arrive at through careful analysis of evidence, and how many did you absorb through repeated exposure to certain ideas in your environment, your media consumption, your social circle? The antidote is awareness. When you notice an idea being repeated constantly from multiple sources without variation, with unusual consistency, that's your signal to question it. Not necessarily to reject it, but to examine it consciously rather than absorbing it unconsciously. Ask yourself, am I believing this because I've examined the evidence, or am I believing this because I've heard it so many times that it feels true? That distinction is the difference between being programmed and being conscious. Method 2. Emotional hijacking. The second method is more powerful because it bypasses logic entirely. Instead of convincing your rational mind, it targets your emotions, because emotions are faster than thoughts, stronger than reason, and once activated, they color everything that follows. Here's how it works. Someone wants to install a belief in your mind. Instead of presenting logical arguments for that belief, they create an emotional state in you: fear, anger, desire, disgust, tribal belonging. Once that emotion is activated, the belief is presented, and your mind, already activated emotionally, accepts it. You see this everywhere. News media doesn't just report events, it frames them to trigger specific emotions. Fear makes you more receptive to authoritarian solutions. Anger makes you more receptive to divisive narratives. Desire makes you more receptive to consumerism. Once the emotion is activated, the associated beliefs slide in without resistance. Politicians use this constantly. They don't lead with policy, they lead with emotional storytelling. The immigrant taking your job, the elite destroying your values, the apocalypse we're facing. These aren't arguments, they're emotional activations. And once you're activated, whatever solution they propose feels reasonable because it addresses the emotion they just created in you. But here's what's crucial to understand. The emotion isn't a natural response to the belief. The emotion is a tool to make you accept the belief. The defense? Separate emotion from belief. When you notice yourself feeling strongly about something, pause. Don't act on the belief while the emotion is active. Wait. Let the emotion settle. Then examine the belief with a clear mind. You'll often find that what seemed obviously true in an emotional state looks very different in a calm state. Emotions are valuable. They're part of being human, but they're not rational guides. And when someone is deliberately triggering emotions to install beliefs, you need to recognize that manipulation for what it is. Method 3. Identity fusion. The third method is the most insidious because it doesn't just change what you think, it changes who you think you are. Here's the mechanism. Instead of trying to convince you of an idea, they make the idea part of your identity. They link acceptance of the idea with being a certain type of person. And once that link is established, rejecting the idea feels like rejecting yourself. This is what you see in political tribalism. It's not enough to have different policies. Each side creates identity markers. If you believe X, you're one of us. You're smart, moral, enlightened. If you believe Y, you're one of them. You're ignorant, immoral, deceived. Once this identity fusion happens, evidence becomes irrelevant. You don't evaluate beliefs based on truth anymore. You evaluate them based on whether accepting them reinforces your identity or threatens it. Think about how hard it is to change someone's mind once they've made a belief part of their identity. You can present overwhelming evidence and they'll reject it. Not because the evidence is bad, but because accepting it would require them to admit they've been wrong, which feels like admitting they're a bad person. This is why cults work. They don't just teach beliefs, they create new identities. You're not just someone who agrees with the teachings, you're a chosen one, an enlightened person, part of the special group that understands what others don't. Once that identity is in place, leaving feels like losing yourself. But this happens in less extreme forms everywhere. Consumer culture creates identity around brands. You're not just someone who owns Apple products, you're the kind of person who appreciates design and innovation. Political movements create identity around positions. You're not just someone who supports a policy, you're a progressive, a conservative, a libertarian, each with an entire identity package attached. The manipulation is this. Once they've fused the belief with your identity, they control you. Because now questioning the belief feels like questioning yourself, and most people will defend even false beliefs rather than experience the discomfort of identity dissolution. The freedom comes from recognizing that you are not your beliefs. You are the awareness that holds beliefs. Beliefs can change, be examined, be updated, be released, and you remain. When someone tries to make a belief part of your identity, that's your signal that they're trying to control you through identity fusion. Stay flexible, stay open, hold your beliefs loosely enough that you can examine them honestly. Because the moment a belief becomes who you are, you've lost the ability to question whether it's true. The fourth method leverages one of the deepest human instincts, the need to belong. We're tribal creatures. We survived as a species by being part of groups. And that survival instinct means we're wired to adopt the beliefs of our group, even when those beliefs are irrational. This is social proof, the phenomenon where people assume that if everyone else believes something, it must be true. And those who understand this don't just present ideas to you, they present ideas along with evidence that everyone believes them. This is why fake social proof is everywhere. fake reviews, bought followers, manipulated trending topics, orchestrated consensus. Because once you believe that most people accept an idea, your mind becomes dramatically more likely to accept it too. You see this in political polling, designed not to measure opinion, but to shape it. When people believe their candidate is winning, they're more likely to vote for them. When people believe everyone agrees with a position, they're more likely to adopt it. The polls aren't reflecting reality, they're creating it. You see this in social media, where algorithms amplify certain voices to make it seem like certain positions are more popular than they are. You see this in movements that create the illusion of unanimous agreement when there's actually significant dissent. But the manipulation is in the everyone is often fabricated. The consensus is artificial. The social proof is manufactured. But once you believe it's real, it works just as well as if it were. The defense is to remember, truth is not determined by popularity. Something isn't true because most people believe it. Something isn't false because most people reject it. Reality doesn't operate democratically. When you notice yourself thinking everyone knows this or everyone agrees with this, that's your signal to question it. Who's everyone? Have you actually checked? Or are you accepting manufactured consensus? Real consensus can exist, but manufactured consensus is a control mechanism, and learning to tell the difference is essential to maintaining an independent mind. Method 5. The frog in boiling water. The fifth method is the most patient and perhaps the most effective: gradual normalization. They don't change your mind all at once. They change it slowly, incrementally, so gradually that you never notice you're being changed. The metaphor is the frog in boiling water. If you put a frog in boiling water, it jumps out immediately. But if you put it in cooled water and slowly turn up the heat, it doesn't notice the gradual change until it's too late. This is exactly how minds are rewired over time, not through sudden dramatic shifts, but through tiny incremental changes that each seem reasonable in the moment, but compound into radical transformation. You see this in how political positions shift. What was considered extreme 10 years ago is mainstream today. What was unacceptable in public discourse 20 years ago is normalized now. Not because of sudden change, but because of thousands of tiny steps, each one just slightly beyond the previous boundary, until the boundary has moved miles from where it started. You see this in how personal boundaries erode. Someone pushes slightly past your comfort zone. You accept it to avoid conflict. They push slightly further. You accept that too. And step by step, behavior that you would have immediately rejected at the beginning becomes your new normal. The manipulation is in the incremental nature. Each step seems small. Each compromise seems reasonable. Each shift seems like no big deal, but the cumulative effect is profound. By the time you notice you've been changed, you've traveled so far from your starting point that you barely recognize your former self. And because the change was gradual, you don't have a clear moment to point to where the manipulation happened. So you assume you changed yourself, that this evolution was natural, that your new beliefs are authentically yours. They're not. They were installed through patient, systematic, incremental normalization. The defense is to maintain clear principles and regularly check yourself against them. Not rigid inflexibility, but conscious awareness. This is what I value. This is what I believe. This is what I stand for. And when you notice drift, you examine it. Is this genuine growth, or is this gradual erosion? Sometimes change is good. Sometimes evolution is necessary, but it should be conscious, chosen, examined. Not unconscious, imposed, normalized without your awareness. Now that you know the 5 methods, you'll start seeing them everywhere. In advertising, in media, in politics, in social movements, in personal relationships where people are trying to influence you. And here's what's important. Recognizing these patterns isn't about becoming cynical or distrustful or isolated. It's about becoming conscious.
about reclaiming sovereignty over your own mind, about being able to distinguish between genuine persuasion and psychological manipulation. Genuine persuasion presents evidence, engages your reason, respects your autonomy, and allows you to disagree. Manipulation uses these 5 methods to bypass your conscious evaluation and install beliefs directly. When you see repetition without evidence, emotional activation without logic, identity fusion, manufactured social proof, or gradual normalization, that's your signal. That's when you need to step back, examine what's happening, and make a conscious choice about what you actually believe. Your mind is yours, not theirs, not the culture's, not the algorithms, yours. But maintaining that ownership requires vigilance, requires awareness, requires the willingness to question even, especially, those thoughts that feel most obviously true, because those are usually the ones that were most successfully installed. So what do you do with this knowledge? How do you protect yourself without becoming paranoid? First, develop the habit of questioning the source of your beliefs, not endlessly, not obsessively, but regularly. Where did this belief come? Did I reason my way to it, or did I absorb it? Am I thinking this, or am I repeating this? Second, notice emotional activation. When you feel suddenly strongly about something, pause. Don't act on it immediately. Let the emotions settle. Then examine the belief with clarity. Third, hold your identity loosely. You are not your beliefs. You are not your positions. You are the consciousness that can examine and update beliefs. The moment you make a belief part of who you are, you've made yourself vulnerable to identity fusion manipulation. Fourth, question consensus. When everyone seems to agree, ask who's everyone and whether that consensus is organic or manufactured. And fifth, maintain principles and regularly check for drift. Know what you value, know what you stand for, and notice when you're being gradually moved away from those principles. This isn't paranoia, this is consciousness. This is maintaining sovereignty over the territory of your own mind. Because your mind is the most valuable thing you possess. It's how you experience reality. It's how you make decisions. It's how you create your life. And if someone else is controlling it, you're not living your life. You're living their agenda. Reclaim your mind, not through isolation or cynicism, but through awareness and conscious choice. This is mind armor. This is where manipulation is exposed and sovereignty is reclaimed.